The crematorium attendant wouldn't meet my eyes when he handed me the metal box. "There was something else," he said, sliding an envelope across the counter. My sister's handwriting stared back at me, neat and precise as always. For Margaret. Open alone. I should explain how I came to be standing in that sterile office, holding my sister Helen's ashes in one hand and her final letter in the other. The envelope was sealed with red wax and affectation she'd maintained since childhood, when we played at being Victorian ladies exchanging secrets. Her signature curved across the seal, that same flourish she'd perfected at 12. These last words, this goodbye, this confession I hadn't known was coming. They weighed nothing, yet my hand trembled. The paper inside would contain her truth, some family secret she'd guarded in silence until her disappearance and death. Maybe something about the will, or evidence of what really happened with Dad's inheritance. The funeral was in 3 days. This message, dated 2 weeks ago, had been waiting here with specific instructions. Give it to me only after the cremation, only when I came alone. Helen had been missing for 6 months before they found her body. Heart failure, the coroner said, in a motel room 2 states away. Natural causes for a 58-year-old woman with no history of cardiac problems. I'd identified her through a video call pandemic rules still lingering in some counties, and her face on that screen looked peaceful, almost amused, as if she knew something I didn't. I drove home with her ashes in the passenger seat, the letter unopened in my purse. Every red light felt like Helen telling me to slow down, think carefully. She'd always been the methodical one. I was 62 and supposedly the older, wiser sister, but Helen had run our father's construction business for 20 years while I taught high school English. She understood contracts and leverage. She knew how to document things. Our family home sat empty now, had been for 3 years since our mother's death. Helen had promised to handle the sale, the lawyers, the massive amount of paperwork involved in untangling our parents' estate. "You've got enough on your plate with Tom's medical bills," she'd said. My husband's cancer treatments had drained our savings, and Helen knew it. She'd offered to float us a loan from her share of the eventual sale, but I'd refused. Pride, maybe. Or maybe I'd sensed even then that something was off about how she'd swooped in to manage everything. I pulled into my driveway and saw our brother Michael's truck parked outside. He was leaning against it, smoking, even though he'd supposedly quit 5 years ago. Michael was 45, the baby of the family, though he hadn't been babied since Dad put him to work on construction sites at 14. His hands were permanently stained with engine grease from his mechanic shop, and right now those hands were shaking. "You got her?" he asked, nodding at the box. "Yeah." "They give you anything else? Papers or anything?" The letter seemed to pulse in my purse. "Just the death certificate." "Why?" He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot. "I went by the old house yesterday. Someone changed the locks." "What do you mean someone changed the locks?" "Helen had the only keys." "That's what I mean." He looked at me directly for the first time. "Maggie, there's something wrong here. Helen didn't just die in some random motel. She was running from something. Or someone." I wanted to tell him about the letter, but Helen's instruction echoed. "Open alone." Michael had always been volatile, quick to anger. If there was something in that letter about him, I needed to know first. Who would she be running from? I kept my voice steady, the way I used to when dealing with troubled students. "You really don't know, do you?" He laughed. but it was bitter. Helen wasn't just managing Mom and Dad's estate. She was stealing it. The accusation hung between us like a blade. Inside the house, I could hear Tom moving around, probably getting up from his afternoon rest. He'd need his medications soon, the ones that cost $800 a month, even with insurance. That's a hell of a thing to say about your dead sister. It's the truth. I've got proof. He reached into his truck, pulled out a manila folder. Bank statements, forged signatures. She transferred the house title to herself 6 months ago, right before she disappeared. I took the folder, my hands steady even as my mind raced. The documents inside were photocopies, but they looked authentic. Our family home, worth at least $1 million in today's market, now belongs solely to Helen's estate. Our mother's signature on the transfer deed was shaky, obviously forged. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The point is, she screwed us, and now she's conveniently dead before we could confront her. But Helen wasn't the type to run. She was the type to stand her ground with documentation and legal precedent. And she'd left me a letter. I need time to process this, I said. Michael grabbed my arm as I turned to go inside. Not hard, but firm. We need to contest this before her estate goes through probate. You understand that, right? We need to move fast. I said I need time. He released me, stepped back. Tom's treatments are expensive. I get it. But Helen knew that too, and she still did this to you. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. She chose herself over family. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table with Helen's letter. Tom was in the living room, watching the news with the volume too high. His hearing had been going even before the chemo. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the red wax seal. I broke it. The paper inside was thick, expensive. Helen's handwriting filled 2 pages, dated exactly 2 weeks ago. My eyes went immediately to the first line. If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. My throat tightened. I forced myself to continue. Margaret, by now Michael has probably shown you his evidence of my theft. He's very proud of those forgeries. Yes, forgeries. I have the originals in a safety deposit box, along with video recordings of Mom signing them with me and her attorney present. She was lucid that day, despite what Michael claimed about her dementia. The key is hidden in the last place we kept secrets as children. You'll remember when you think about it. I stopped reading. The last place we kept secrets. The hollow oak tree in the backyard of our childhood home. We'd hidden diary pages there, love letters from boys, cigarettes we'd stolen from Dad. If Helen had put a key there, then she'd been back to the house recently. But Michael said the locks were changed. The letter continued. Our brother has been stealing from Mom and Dad's accounts for 3 years. Small amounts at first, checks written to cash, ATM withdrawals. Mom knew but didn't want to prosecute her own son. She made me promise to protect the estate from him after she died. That's why she transferred everything to me. Not to steal from you, Margaret, but to preserve it until I could figure out how to handle Michael without destroying the family. But Michael found out about the transfer 6 months ago. He confronted me, threatened me. I have the voicemails, the texts. They're in the safety deposit box too. When I refused to reverse the transfer, he said he'd make me disappear. I laughed it off. Michael was always dramatic, all thunder and no lightning. But then strange things started happening. My brake lines were cut. Someone broke into my apartment while I was sleeping, stood at the foot of my bed, and left without taking anything just to show me they could. The security footage was mysteriously corrupted. So I ran. I've been moving from motel to motel, trying to stay ahead of whoever Michael hired. Because it's not him doing this, he's too smart for that. He's paying someone, probably with money he stole from our parents. My hands were shaking now. I looked toward the living room, where Tom dozed in his recliner, then back at the letter. I'm writing this from a motel in Delaware. I've been having chest pains for 3 days. I should go to a hospital, but hospitals require identification, create records, leave trails. I can't risk it. If I die here, at least you'll get this letter. The crematorium has instructions. The safety deposit box is at First National Downtown Branch. Box 472. Once you have the key and the contents, you'll have everything you need to destroy Michael and restore the estate properly. Your share and mine? I was going to surprise you, pay off Tom's medical debt. I'm sorry I waited too long. One more thing. Michael doesn't know about the video recordings. He thinks his forgeries are the only documents that exist. Let him file them in court. Let him perjure himself. Then produce the originals and the videos. The fraud charges alone will put him away for years. I love you, Margaret. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I'm sorry for the secrets. But mostly, I'm sorry I underestimated our baby brother. Helen P.S. If something feels wrong about my death, request an independent autopsy. Pay for it yourself if you have to. Document everything. I read the letter twice more, memorizing every word before I heard Tom stirring in the living room. The power dynamics of our family had just shifted entirely. Michael thought he held all the cards with his forged documents. But Helen, methodical Helen, had been 3 steps ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tom's breathing machine wheezed beside me, steady and mechanical, while Helen's words circled my mind. The crematorium had already processed her body. There would be no autopsy now. Had that been Michael's plan all along? I thought about calling the police. But with what evidence? A letter from a dead woman accusing her brother of hiring someone to kill her? They'd want proof, and the proof was locked in a safety deposit box I couldn't access without a key hidden in a house with changed locks. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Helen's bank statements. Not the forgeries Michael had shown me, but the legitimate ones I'd found in her apartment when I'd gone to collect her things months ago, right after she'd disappeared. I'd barely looked at them then, too worried about finding her to care about finances. Now I studied them like they were evidence in a murder trial. The patterns were subtle but clear once you knew what to look for. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, always just under $10,000, the amount that triggers federal reporting. The transfers started 3 years ago, right after Dad died, and increased in frequency after Mom's death. Helen had documented everything in the margins of these statements, her neat handwriting tracking each suspicious transaction. But she'd never told me. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Lawyer meeting tomorrow at 10. Be there or I file without you. I texted back. Which lawyer? Richardson, Dad's old friend. He'll help us make this right. Richardson. I remembered him from the funeral. A skeletal man who'd gripped my hand too long and whispered that Helen had been troubled lately, paranoid. Had Michael been setting this narrative up even then? The next morning, I drove past our childhood home on the way to the lawyer's office. The lockbox on the front door was definitely new electronic. the kind real estate agents use. But the house wasn't for sale. I pulled over and walked around to the backyard, my heart pounding. The oak tree was still there, massive and familiar. I reached into the hollow we'd used as children, felt around in decades of decomposed leaves and dirt. Nothing. But then my fingers brushed something metal taped to the upper inside curve. Somewhere a child's hand wouldn't have reached. A safety deposit key. I pocketed it and was walking back to my car when a black sedan pulled up. A woman got out, mid-40s, professional blazer, the kind of purposeful walk that suggested law enforcement or something adjacent. Margaret Sinclair? Yes? I'm Diana Voss, private investigator. Your sister hired me 6 months ago. My mind went blank. Helen's dead. I know. That's why I'm here. She glanced around the empty street. Can we talk somewhere private? Not your house. Not your brother's shop. Somewhere public, but quiet. We met at a diner 2 towns over. The kind where truckers stopped for coffee, and nobody paid attention to 2 women in a corner booth. Diana ordered black coffee and pulled out a tablet. Your sister was my client from February until about 3 weeks ago, when she stopped responding to my messages. She hired me to investigate financial fraud within your family's estate. But the investigation expanded when she started receiving threats. From Michael? That's what she believed, but I could never prove it directly. Your brother is smarter than he looks. Uses intermediaries, pays in cash, keeps his hands clean. She turned the tablet toward me. These are the threatening messages your sister received. The screenshots showed text messages from unknown numbers. Stop digging or disappear. You can't hide forever. Family should stick together. Or else. Did you go to the police? Your sister didn't want to. She said it would destroy the family, make everything public. She just wanted to gather enough evidence to force Michael to back down. Diana's expression darkened. I told her she was being naive. People who hire muscle don't usually back down, they double down. Do you think Michael had her killed? I think your sister died of a heart attack in a motel room after 6 months of chronic stress, no medical care, and constant fear. Whether someone helped that along with the right drugs. She shrugged. Certain substances can trigger cardiac events and leave no trace, especially after cremation. My coffee went cold as she showed me more documents. Michael's connections to local criminals, money transfers to unnamed individuals, a pattern of intimidation against business partners who'd crossed him. Helen had been building a case for 3 years. She gave me something to give to you, if anything happened to her. Diana pulled out a flash drive. Videos, documents, recordings, everything's here. But Margaret, you need to be careful. Your brother has been escalating since Helen's death. He knows there's evidence somewhere. He just doesn't know where. I thought about the safety deposit key in my pocket. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I was waiting to see what Michael would do. Sometimes guilty people reveal themselves when they think they're safe. She paused. He filed forged documents with the probate court yesterday. That's a felony. Now we can prove intent to defraud. Richardson's law office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. All dark wood and leather-bound books designed to intimidate. Michael was already there when I arrived, sitting across from Richardson with a stack of documents between them. They both stood when I entered, Richardson extending his hand with that same funeral grip. Margaret, so sorry for your loss. Helen was troubled at the end, but we'll make sure her mistakes don't harm the family legacy. Her mistakes. I kept my voice level. Michael jumped in. She was obviously having some kind of breakdown. Paranoid delusions, hiding money, disappearing like that. But we can fix this quietly. Keep it in the family. I sat down, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. I'm recording this conversation for my records. I assume that's acceptable? Richardson's smile tightened. That's not really necessary. I insist. They exchanged glances. Michael leaned forward. Maggie, we're family. We don't need recordings between us. Helen was family too. The temperature in the room dropped. Richardson cleared his throat, shuffled papers. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. The estate transfer to Helen appears to be fraudulent. Your mother's signature. Have you verified it with a handwriting expert? I asked. Well, not yet. But it's obviously... Obviously what? Did you witness the signing? No, but your mother had dementia. She couldn't have... Her medical records from that period show she had mild cognitive decline, but was still legally competent. I have the neurological evaluation. I didn't, but they didn't know that. Michael's face was reddening. Maggie, what are you doing? Helen stole from us. Did she? Or did she protect the estate from someone else who was stealing? The accusation landed like a bomb. Richardson stood up. I think we should postpone this meeting until everyone has calmed down. Sit down, I said quietly. I'm not finished. Something in my voice made him obey. 35 years of controlling classrooms had taught me that tone, the one that meant business. Michael, you showed me bank statements yesterday. Photocopies, you said. Where did you get the originals? From Helen's apartment. When? She's been missing for 6 months. The landlord changed the locks after the first month of non-payment. He hesitated. I had copies from before. From before what? Before she disappeared? Why would you have copies of her bank statements from before she disappeared? Richardson intervened. This is all speculation. No, it's not. I pulled out the flash drive Diana had given me, though I hadn't even looked at its contents yet. I have recordings of Michael threatening Helen. I have evidence of financial fraud going back 3 years. And I have proof that the documents you're about to file with the court are forgeries. Michael went very still. Not the stillness of surprise, but the stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike or retreat. You're lying. Am I? File your papers. Let's see what the court says when I produce the originals. There are no originals. Helen destroyed them. I smiled then and saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that Helen might have been smarter than he thought. How would you know what Helen destroyed unless you were in communication with her while she was missing? Or unless you knew where she was? The meeting ended with Richardson suggesting we all take time to reassess our positions. Michael left without speaking to me, his truck tires squealing as he pulled out of the parking lot. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands shaking, before I felt safe enough to drive. The First National Bank downtown branch was the kind of place that still had marble floors and tellers who knew your name. I'd banked there for 40 years. The woman who led me to the safety deposit boxes had taught Sunday school with me when our kids were small. I'm so sorry about Helen, she said as she inserted her master key. Such a shock. Box 472 was larger than I'd expected. Inside were 3 manila envelopes, a smaller box, and another sealed letter with my name on it. I signed everything out and drove straight to the police station. Not our local one. I didn't trust that Michael didn't have friends there. but the state police barracks 20 miles away. The detective who met with me was younger than my own children, with careful eyes and a habit of writing everything down longhand. I showed him the flash drive first, though we discovered together that it was encrypted. Then I opened the first manila envelope. The documents inside were devastating in their thoroughness. Original transfer papers with our mother's actual signature, witnessed and notarized. Video recordings on a small digital camera showed Mom sitting at her kitchen table, alert and articulate, explaining why she was transferring everything to Helen. "Michael's been taking money," she said clearly on the recording. "Small amounts, but it adds up. I love my son, but I can't let him destroy what his father built. Helen will protect Margaret's share. That's all that matters." The second envelope contained Michael's threats, voicemails, texts, even photographs of Helen taken without her knowledge. Proof someone had been following her. The metadata showed they were taken over a period of months. The third envelope was the worst. Bank records showing Michael had stolen over $300,000 from our parents' accounts. Check copies with forged signatures. ATM footage showing him using our mother's card while she was in the hospital. Helen had compiled everything with the precision of a prosecutor. The detective was quiet for a long moment after reviewing everything. "This is extensive financial fraud, but it doesn't prove he killed your sister." "She died of a heart attack." "Exactly. Without a body to examine." "What about the threats? The stalking?" "We can charge him with that, certainly." "But murder?" He shook his head. "The district attorney won't pursue it without physical evidence." I thought about the small box I hadn't opened yet, still in my bag. What would constitute physical evidence? Something showing he had means and opportunity, presence at the scene, purchase of substances that could induce cardiac arrest, that sort of thing. I thanked him and left with copies of everything filed. The originals would stay in evidence. As I sat in my car in the parking lot, I opened Helen's second letter. "Margaret, if you're reading this, you've found everything in the safety deposit box. But there's one more thing. Something I couldn't leave in a bank. Go to the motel where I died. Room 237. I paid for it through the end of the year in cash. The manager thinks I'm a writer needing solitude. Under the bathroom sink, behind the panel, you'll find what Michael's people were looking for, what they killed me to find. Be careful. Trust no one except Diana Voss. H. The motel was 2 states away, a 5-hour drive. I told Tom I was visiting my cousin in Philadelphia, packed an overnight bag, and left that afternoon. The place was exactly what you'd expect. A row of doors facing a parking lot, cigarette butts in the planters, a neon sign missing half its letters. The manager, a Pakistani man with kind eyes, handed me the key without questions. "You're her sister," he said. It wasn't a question. "She showed me your picture, said you might come." Room 237 smelled like industrial disinfectant, trying to mask something else. The bed where Helen died had been stripped to the mattress. I found myself staring at it, imagining her final moments. Alone, terrified, her heart giving out while she waited for someone to find her. The bathroom was cramped and yellow with age. I knelt on the cracked linoleum and felt under the sink until I found the loose panel. Behind it was a plastic bag wrapped in duct tape. Inside, a small voice recorder, a pill bottle with 3 white tablets, and a receipt from a veterinary supply company. The voice recorder contained a single conversation. Michael's voice, clear and angry. Just make it look natural. She has a bad heart anyway. All that stress. Nobody will question it. Another voice, unfamiliar. The stuff's untraceable after 24 hours. Metabolizes like natural adrenaline. But it has to be ingested, not injected. She's paranoid about her food. How? Leave that to me. I've got someone on the cleaning staff at her motel. They'll put it in her coffee maker. She won't taste it in coffee. The recording ended. The receipt was for potassium chloride, commonly used to euthanize animals. Bought with Michael's credit card. The pills in the bottle. I'd have them tested, but I was certain they were the same substance. I drove home through the night, the evidence in my bag feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Helen had known they were going to kill her. She'd recorded them planning it. But she'd stayed in that motel room anyway. Why? The answer came when I opened the small box from the safety deposit collection. Inside was a medical report, dated 3 weeks before her death. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 3 months to live, maybe 6 with treatment. Helen had been dying anyway. She'd let them kill her. She'd gathered the evidence, set the trap, and let them spring it. Because murder charges would stick where financial fraud might get pleaded down. Because she wanted Michael not just punished, but destroyed. Tom was still asleep when I got home at dawn. I sat at the kitchen table and called Diana Voss. I found everything, I said. The recording? Yes. And the substance they used. And a receipt. She was quiet for a moment. That's enough for murder charges. I know. Are you ready for what comes next? This will destroy your family. Everything will come out, the theft, the threats, the murder. Michael will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. I thought about Helen, dying alone in that motel room. About our mother, knowing her son was stealing, but loving him too much to stop him. About Tom's medical bills and the treatment he needed to survive. About the $1 million house that should have been split 3 ways, but would now be split 2, or maybe just 1, if Michael was convicted. He killed our sister, I said. Yes, he did. Then I'm ready. But I wasn't. Not for Michael showing up at my house that night, drunk and raging. Tom was at his chemotherapy appointment. I'd timed it that way, knowing somehow that Michael would come. He stood on my porch, swaying, his face twisted with fury and fear. You talked to the cops. Yes. You stupid bitch. You have no idea what you've done. I've reported evidence of financial fraud and murder. He laughed, ugly and sharp. Murder. Helen died of a heart attack. Says so right on the death certificate. Induced by potassium chloride in her coffee. I have the recording of you planning it, the receipt for the substance, and the pills you tried to have planted. His face went white. You're lying. I'm not. Helen was smarter than both of us, Michael. She knew you were going to kill her. She recorded everything. That recording won't hold up in court. Could be anybody's voice. Voice recognition technology is very advanced these days, and the receipt has your signature. He stepped closer, and I smelled the bourbon on his breath. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Part of me almost hoped he would more evidence, more charges. But he just stood there, breathing hard, his hands clenching and unclenching. She was sick anyway, he finally said. Cancer. She was going to die regardless. You didn't know that when you had her poisoned. Prove it. I don't have to. The district attorney will. Michael was arrested 3 days later at his shop. The news made the local papers. Local mechanic charged in sister's murder. The story was picked up by regional media when the financial fraud angle came out. Family fortune becomes deadly. Brother accused of killing sister over $1 million estate. Our family's dirty laundry was suddenly everyone's breakfast reading. Tom took it harder than I'd expected. Not the public shame. He'd never cared what people thought. But the betrayal itself. Michael was at our wedding, he kept saying, as if that should have prevented all of this. The stress wasn't good for his condition. His oncologist increased his medications, warned about keeping his blood pressure stable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Helen had died of an induced heart attack, and now her death was giving my husband one. The preliminary hearing was set for a month out. Diana Voss connected me with a victim's rights attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in complex family crimes. She walked me through what to expect. Michael's lawyers would attack Helen's character, claim she was paranoid and delusional, suggest she'd taken the potassium chloride herself as suicide. But the recording, I started, can be challenged. Voice analysis isn't foolproof. They'll argue it could be manipulated, that Helen could have hired actors. The receipt is better evidence, but they'll claim someone else used his card, that it was stolen. The threats? The stalking? All circumstantial without witnesses. Your brother was smart to use intermediaries. I felt the case against Michael weakening with every word. Patricia must have seen my despair, because she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. This is what defense attorneys do, poke holes, create doubt. But juries aren't stupid. The pattern of behavior, the financial motive, the evidence Helen collected, it tells a story. We just need to make sure it's a story they believe. She was right about Michael's defense team. They were expensive, aggressive, and media savvy. They painted Helen as a mentally unstable woman who'd stolen from her family and then killed herself when her crimes were about to be exposed. They suggested I'd manufactured evidence out of grief and greed. They even implied that I'd been in on Helen's original theft and was now trying to cover my tracks. The character assassination was thorough and brutal. Stories started appearing in the press about Helen's erratic behavior in the months before her disappearance. Former co-workers, people who'd never said a bad word about her in life, suddenly remembered her being paranoid, secretive, unstable. Michael's lawyer, a slick man named Brennan, who'd defended worse people than my brother, held press conferences on the courthouse steps. This is a tragedy of mental illness and family dysfunction, he said to the cameras. Helen Sinclair was a troubled woman who took her own life rather than face the consequences of her actions. Now her sister, motivated by greed and resentment, is trying to destroy the only surviving member of their family. I wanted to scream that Michael had hired people to say these things, that this was all orchestrated. But Patricia advised silence. Let them talk. Every lie they tell is another one we can disprove in court. The problem was, some of it wasn't lies. Helen had been paranoid in those final months because someone was trying to kill her. She had been secretive because she was gathering evidence. She had isolated herself because she couldn't trust anyone. The truth and the lies were so tangled together that even I sometimes lost track. 2 weeks before the trial, I got a call from the medical examiner who'd signed Helen's death certificate. Dr. Raymond Foster, a man near retirement who sounded tired and cautious. Mrs. Sinclair, I've been subpoenaed to testify in your brother's trial. Yes? I wanted you to know that I've reviewed my findings in light of the new evidence. The potassium chloride found at the scene, it could have induced the cardiac event. My heart raced. You're changing your determination? I'm saying it's possible. Without tissue samples, which we don't have due to the cremation, I can't be definitive, but it's possible. Will you testify to that? A long pause. I'll testify to the medical facts, the interpretation. That's for the jury. It was something, but not enough. I needed more. Helen had been so thorough, so meticulous. Surely she'd left something else, some final piece of evidence that would seal Michael's fate. I went back to her apartment, which had been sealed since the investigation began. Her laptop was gone, taken as evidence, but her books remained on the shelves. Helen had been a voracious reader, everything from crime novels to medical texts. I ran my fingers along the spines, remembering how she'd quiz me on plots and poisons, always fascinated by the perfect crime. One book felt different, thicker. I pulled it out, a hollowed-out dictionary with a USB drive inside. My hands shook as I pocketed it. At home, I plugged it into my computer. More recordings, but these were different. These were of Michael from years ago, drunk at family gatherings, talking about how he deserved more than his sisters, how women shouldn't inherit what men built, how Dad had promised him everything before Helen manipulated their parents. If something happens to them, he said in one recording, slurring his words at what sounded like Thanksgiving dinner, it all comes to me anyway. That's how it should be. The son carries on the family name. Helen's voice, carefully neutral. What do you mean, if something happens to us? Accidents happen. People get sick. Look at Tom, cancer came out of nowhere. That's a terrible thing to say. It's realistic. We're all going to die someday. Might as well make sure the money stays in the right hands. The recording was dated 2 years before our mother's death, 3 years before Helen's. She'd been collecting evidence for longer than any of us knew. She'd suspected Michael before he'd even done anything, heard the entitlement and rage in his voice, and known what it would lead to. I made copies of everything and drove them to Patricia Chen's office. She listened to the recordings with a poker face, taking notes in her elegant handwriting. This establishes a pattern of thinking, she said finally. It's not proof of murder, but it shows premeditation, planning. Combined with everything else, is it enough? It might be. Juries are unpredictable, but this paints a picture of a man who's been planning to take everything for years. First through theft, then through murder. The trial was set to begin in 10 days. Michael remained free on bail, the judge deeming him not a flight risk, despite the charges. I saw him once at the grocery store. He looked older, grayer, like the weight of what he'd done was finally settling on his shoulders. Or maybe it was just the weight of getting caught. He approached me in the cereal aisle, and I tensed, ready to call for help. But he just stood there, looking at me with our father's eyes. It didn't have to be this way, he said quietly. No, it didn't. You could have been satisfied with your share. My share? His voice rose slightly. Then he caught himself, glanced around at the other shoppers. I worked for Dad since I was 14. Every summer, every weekend. You and Helen got to go to college, have careers. I got grease under my fingernails and a bad back. The business should have been mine. Dad sold the business 15 years ago. The house was all that was left, and it belonged to Mom. It belonged to the family, to the name, to the legacy. To you, you mean? He shrugged. I'm the only one with kids to pass it on to. I thought about his children, 2 boys in high school who'd worshipped their father until the arrest. They hadn't been to see him since bail was posted. Their mother, Michael's ex-wife, had called me crying, apologizing for not seeing what he was capable of. "Your boys won't want anything to do with that legacy now," I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or just anger. "We'll see what they want when the money's on the table." "There won't be any money. Not for you." He smiled then, cold and knowing. "You really think you've won, don't you? You think Helen outsmarted everyone. But she's dead, Maggie. She's dead and I'm alive, and possession is 9/10 of the law. You don't possess anything. The house is in Helen's name. For now." The threat was subtle but clear. I left my card in the aisle and walked out of the store, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get my key in the ignition. That night, I called Patricia and told her about the encounter. She advised me to file a restraining order, document everything, stay vigilant. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in September, the courtroom packed with reporters and curious locals. Tom sat beside me, frail from his latest round of chemo, but determined to be there. Michael entered with his lawyers, wearing a suit I'd never seen before, looking every inch the successful businessman, rather than the mechanic with grease-stained hands I'd known all my life. The prosecutor, a young woman named Sarah Hendricks, who'd specifically requested this case, laid out the evidence methodically. The financial fraud came first, irrefutable proof that Michael had stolen from our parents for years. The bank records, the forged checks, the ATM footage. Michael's lawyer tried to argue that our mother had given him permission, that these were loans, not theft. But the sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. Then came the threats against Helen. The voicemails played through the courtroom speakers, Michael's voice filling the space. "You think you can hide behind legal documents? You think Mom's signature means anything? I'll make you disappear, Helen. No one will even look for you." Michael's face remained impassive, but I saw his lawyer's jaw tighten. They hadn't known about all the recordings. The medical examiner testified about the potassium chloride, how it could have induced cardiac arrest, how it would metabolize quickly and be almost undetectable after 24 hours. The veterinary supply company confirmed the purchase on Michael's credit card. The motel manager testified about finding Helen's body, about the coffee maker that had been tampered with. But it was Diana Voss's testimony that really turned the tide. She'd continued investigating even after Helen's death, and she'd found the intermediary, a man named Carl Brennan, no relation to Michael's lawyer, who'd been paid $30,000 to solve a problem. Carl had been arrested on unrelated drug charges and was willing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He took the stand on day 3 of the trial, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept touching a cross around his neck. Yes, Michael had hired him. Yes, the plan was to make Helen's death look natural. Yes, they'd used potassium chloride because it was hard to detect, and Michael had access through his connections at a veterinary clinic. He said she was dying anyway, Carl testified. Said we were just speeding up the inevitable, making it painless. "Did you know she had cancer?" the prosecutor asked. "Not until after. Michael only found out when he went through her apartment after she died. He was looking for the documents she'd stolen. That's what he called them. The stolen documents. Found her medical records instead. So he didn't know she was terminally ill when he hired you?" "No, he just wanted her gone." Michael's lawyer tried to discredit Carl a convicted felon, a drug addict, a man who'd say anything to reduce his sentence. But the details were too specific, too consistent with the other evidence. And then the prosecutor played the recording I'd found in the motel room. The conversation between Michael and Carl, planning the murder. The defense's turn came on day 4. They painted Helen as a master manipulator who'd turned our mother against Michael, isolated her, and stolen the family fortune. They suggested she'd staged her own death to frame Michael, knowing she was dying anyway. They brought in a psychiatrist who'd never met Helen, but testified about the psychological profile of someone capable of such an elaborate deception. They tried to discredit me, too. Suggested I'd been in financial trouble. True, and desperate for money. Also true. They implied I'd known about Helen's theft all along, and was now trying to claim the entire estate for myself. They even brought up my husband's cancer, suggesting that medical bills had driven me to conspire with Helen. "Isn't it true," Brennan asked during cross-examination, "that your sister offered to pay your husband's medical bills? She offered to loan us money, yes. But you refused." "Yes." "Why would you refuse help from your own sister when your husband was dying?" I looked at Tom in the gallery, saw him nod slightly. "Because I suspected something was wrong with how she'd gotten control of the estate. I didn't want to benefit from it until I knew the truth. Or you were playing a longer game, waiting for your sister to die so you could inherit everything yourself." "Objection," the prosecutor called out. "Speculation." Sustained. But the seed was planted. Doubt was creeping in. I could see it on some jurors' faces, the confusion, the uncertainty. This was what Helen had warned me about in her letters. The truth could be twisted, reframed, made to look like something else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. The trial would likely wrap up in another day or two, and I wasn't sure we'd proven our case beyond reasonable doubt. Michael had good lawyers, a plausible alternative narrative, and enough charm to possibly sway a jury. I went back to Helen's letters, reading them for what felt like the 100th time. There was something I was missing, something she'd tried to tell me. Then I saw it, in the postscript of her first letter. "If something feels wrong about my death, request an independent autopsy. Pay for it yourself if you have to. Document everything." But there had been no autopsy. She'd been cremated. Unless... I called Diana Voss at midnight. "The coffee maker from the motel room. Do you know what happened to it?" "Evidence locker, I assume." "Why?" Helen was meticulous. She documented everything. What if she didn't drink the coffee? "What do you mean?" What if she knew it was poisoned and saved it? What if there's still residue in that coffee maker? Diana was silent for a moment. "I'll make some calls." The next morning, as the defense was preparing to rest their case, the prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, we've just received new evidence that needs to be tested. We request a 2-day continuance." The judge wasn't pleased, but granted it. The coffee maker had been in evidence, and testing revealed significant traces of potassium chloride in the reservoir. Far more than would have been present if Helen had actually drunk the poisoned coffee. She'd known. She'd let them poison her coffee maker, and then hadn't drunk it. But she'd still died of a heart attack. The medical examiner was recalled. Under new questioning, he admitted that extreme stress could have triggered the cardiac event. The stress of knowing someone was trying to kill her, of being hunted for months, of living in fear. The cancer, the stress, the isolation, it had all contributed. But the attempted poisoning was still attempted murder. Even if the poison didn't directly kill her, the prosecutor argued in closing. The defendant's actions led to her death. He hunted her, terrorized her, and attempted to poison her. That she died of a stress-induced heart attack rather than poisoning doesn't diminish his culpability. The defense made one last attempt, arguing that attempted murder was different from murder, that Michael should be charged with the lesser crime. But the judge instructed the jury that causing someone's death through sustained criminal actions, even indirectly, could still constitute murder. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Tom and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee and pretending to read newspapers. Michael's family, his ex-wife and sons, sat on the other side of the room, not making eye contact with anyone. When the verdict came, I was in the bathroom. Tom had to come get me, his face unreadable. We rushed back to the courtroom as the foreman stood up. On the count of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. The room exploded in noise reporters shouting questions, Michael's lawyer demanding the jury be polled, the judge banging his gavel. But I just sat there, staring at my brother as the bailiffs put him in handcuffs. He looked back at me once, and in his eyes I saw not remorse, but rage. Pure, undiluted rage that he'd been caught, that Helen had won even in death. The sentencing came 6 weeks later. Michael got 25 to life for the murder, plus another 10 years for the financial fraud. He'd be eligible for parole when he was 70, if he lived that long. His sons didn't come to the sentencing. His ex-wife sent me a letter apologizing for everything, saying she should have seen what he was capable of. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The estate was settled quietly, with Michael's claims invalidated and Helen's will upheld. Everything came to me as her sole beneficiary. The house sold for $1.2 million, more than we'd expected. After taxes and legal fees, there was enough to pay off Tom's medical debt and set aside a fund for his continuing treatment. The rest I put in trust for Michael's sons. They didn't deserve to suffer for their father's crimes. I kept only one thing from Helen's possessions, the wooden box where she'd kept our childhood secrets, the one she'd referenced in her letter about the hidden key. Inside were pictures of us as children, playing in the yard of that valuable house, unaware that it would one day tear our family apart. There was a photo of all three of us at Michael's high school graduation, Helen and I flanking him in his cap and gown, all of us smiling. He'd had such potential then. We all had. Tom died 8 months after the trial. The doctor said the cancer had been too aggressive, that even with the best treatment, we'd only been buying time. But I think the stress of everything, the trial, the public shame, the destruction of our family, had accelerated his decline. He went quietly on a Tuesday morning in May, holding my hand and whispering that he was proud of me for standing up to Michael, for seeking justice for Helen. I scattered his ashes in the ocean, like he'd wanted. Then I drove to the cemetery, where Helen's ashes had been interred. I'd had them moved from my house after the trial, given her a proper resting place next to our parents. I stood at her grave and told her everything about the trial, about Michael's sentence, about Tom, about how I finally understood why she'd done what she'd done. You knew you were dying, I said to the headstone. You could have just disappeared, let the cancer take you quietly. But you stayed. You gathered evidence. You let them try to kill you because you knew it was the only way to stop him. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the nearby trees. I liked to think it was Helen responding. though I knew better. I found the letter a year later, when I was finally ready to go through the last of Helen's things. It was in a book of poetry, pressed between pages of Emily Dickinson. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was to Michael, dated the day before she died. Michael, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll probably be in prison. I want you to know that I knew about the poison in my coffee maker. I could taste it, metallic, wrong. I didn't drink it. But I'm dying anyway, have been for months. Cancer, the kind that doesn't care about treatments or prayers or last-minute reconciliations. You didn't kill me, but you tried to. And that's enough. The evidence I've gathered will destroy you, as you destroyed our parents' trust, as you would have destroyed Margaret if I'd let you. You always thought you deserved everything, because you were the son, because you carried the name. But names don't mean anything. It's what we do with them that matters. I chose to use mine to protect Margaret, to honor our parents' wishes, to ensure that their legacy went to someone who deserved it. You chose to use yours to steal, to threaten, to attempt murder. That's the difference between us. That's why you're reading this in a cell while Margaret lives free. I don't forgive you. Some things are unforgivable. But I do pity you. You had everything, a family who loved you, children who admired you, a successful business, and you threw it all away for money that was never really yours. I hope someday you understand what you've lost. Not the money or the house or the inheritance. Those were just things. I mean the family, the love, the trust. Those were the real treasures, and you destroyed them with your own hands. Helen. She'd never sent it. Maybe she'd meant to, or maybe she'd just needed to write it. I thought about giving it to Michael in prison, but decided against it. He'd made his choices. He could live with them without Helen's final words. I keep the letter with the others now, in the safety deposit box that once held the evidence of his crimes. Sometimes I think about Helen in that motel room, knowing she was dying, knowing someone was trying to kill her, still gathering evidence with her last strength. She was always the methodical one, the one who thought 3 steps ahead. The house where we grew up has been demolished. The new owners are building something modern, all glass and steel. I drove by last week and watched the construction workers laying foundation where our secret tree used to stand. It seemed fitting somehow, the past erased, something new and unrecognizable in its place. Michael's sons reached out recently. They're in college now, paid for with the trust fund I set up. They wanted to know about their Aunt Helen, about the woman their father had tried to destroy. I told them she was brilliant and careful and brave, that she'd loved family more than anything, which is why betrayal had cut her so deeply, that she'd sacrificed herself to save what was left of us. I didn't tell them about the letters, the recordings, the evidence she'd gathered so meticulously. Someday, maybe, when they're older, when they can understand that people are complicated, that love and hate can exist in the same family, in the same heart. The younger one, David, looks just like Michael did at that age. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. But when he smiles, I see Helen's warmth there. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Or maybe it's hope that the next generation can be better than we were. If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone, Helen had written. But she's not gone. Not really. She's in every legal document that protects the innocent, every piece of evidence that convicts the guilty, every careful plan that shields the vulnerable from those who would harm them. She's in the trust fund that educates her nephews, in the house sale that paid for Tom's final months of comfort, in the justice that finally came for Michael. She won in the end, our methodical sister. Not the victory any of us wanted, a family destroyed, a brother in prison, 2 sisters dead. But she protected what mattered most. She kept her promise to our mother. She saved me from Michael's greed. And she ensured that the truth, complicated and painful as it was, finally came to light. I'm 65 now, living alone in a small apartment near the school where I used to teach. Sometimes former students stop me in the grocery store, tell me about their lives, their children, their careers. They don't mention the trial, the headlines, the family scandal that consumed our town for months. They just smile and thank me for teaching them to think critically, to look for evidence, to question everything. You taught us to read between the lines, one said recently, to look for what wasn't being said. If only I'd been better at that with my own family. If only I'd seen Michael's rage earlier, Helen's fear, our mother's desperate attempts to protect us from each other. But we see what we want to see, especially with those we love. The last time I visited Michael in prison, he asked me if I ever thought about forgiveness. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow, in his orange jumpsuit. Helen didn't forgive you, I said. I'm not asking about Helen. I'm asking about you. I thought about it for a long time. About the brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle when Dad was too drunk to do it, who'd held my first child when she was born. That Michael was gone. Had been gone for years before he'd tried to kill Helen. Maybe he'd never really existed at all. No, I finally said. I don't think about forgiveness. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. We sat in silence until the guard said visiting time was over. As I stood to leave, he called out, "Maggie?" I turned back. "Tell my boys. Tell them I'm sorry." "Tell them yourself. They're old enough to decide if they want to hear it." That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back. Sometimes, late at night, I read Helen's letters again. Not for clues now. All the mysteries have been solved. I read them to remember her voice, her careful way with words, her ability to see the truth even when it hurt. She was the smart one, the careful one, the one who should have lived. But she chose otherwise. She chose to be the evidence, the witness, the proof. She chose to die so that justice could live. If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. But the truth remains. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the dead speak louder than the living ever could.